Join me in welcoming Chris Sarandon.
Thank you. Those stairs are made for little people. Hi, I'm Chris Sarandon, and welcome to Cooking by Heart, where we revisit the vivid memories of the food we grew up with.
I couldn't believe the tastes and the flavors.
Lydia Bastianich.
Hi, Chris. Susan Sarandon.
And the people and the stories attached to that time in our lives.
I was the one sort of like mommy dearest.
We're coming to you tonight from the Country School in Madison, Connecticut. And we have a wonderful audience here from Madison, yes. And by the way, I don't know if any of you were present. We did a show with Jacques Pepin, a Madison citizen, right? Yeah. With Jacques last year at the SHU Community Theater in Fairfield, Connecticut. It was great. And also Lydia Bastianich. And we have a very special guest for you tonight, and I'm sure you know who it is. It's Rocco DiSpirito, a James Beard Award-winning chef, healthy lifestyle expert, and best-selling author of 14 books, including 3 #1 New York Times bestsellers. Rocco began his culinary studies at the Culinary Institute of America, and by the age of 20, was working in the kitchens of legendary chefs around the globe. He was named Food and Wine magazine's Best New Chef, and was the first chef to appear on Gourmet magazine's cover as America's most exciting young chef. Rocco is a frequent guest on the Food Network, participating in shows like the Tournament of Champions and Guy's Grocery Games. His 3-star restaurant, Union Pacific, by the way, at which a New York Times reviewer famously said that a fellow diner moaned as she ate. Right, Union Pacific was a culinary landmark for many years. Most recently, he received 2 stars from the New York Times as chef of the critically acclaimed Standard Grill in New York City. Rocco's new cookbook, which I'm sure you're all aware of, Everyday Delicious, is out tomorrow and is in bookstores and online as the folks who are listening and watching this podcast as we speak. Ladies and gentlemen, Rocco DiSpirito.
What's up, Chris?
Hey, buddy.
How are you? Nice to see you.
Good to see you too, Rocco. Welcome. The introduction of Everyday Delicious has this following sentence, and it really leads us into what we're going to be talking about tonight. Quote, in its own way, food is the language to express our life stories. And I want to know what your life story is. So let's start with provenance.
Okay.
Where you're from.
How many hours do you have?
Well, born and bred.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. Thank you guys for coming back. I'm late every year, so I appreciate you believing in the fact that I'd be on time this year. Who was here for one of my famous 2-hour late day? Okay, thank you. See, and you came back for more. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
He came early, by the way.
I've been here since noon, just so you know. I'm so terrified about being late again.
I think you're good with the mic because he's going to regulate.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay. Got it. It's a comedy microphone. By the way, thanks for putting the bathroom right next to the stage. You guys must know about my condition. Chris, I destroyed your set. Here we go. Is this going to work? Okay.
All right.
So, as you know, I'm a dual citizen. I think we talked about it briefly backstage, just like you being Greek American heritage.
Right.
I'm Italian American heritage, which means you're always 1 foot in the old country, 1 foot in the new country.
Right.
And I've written about the fact that I suffered from ethnic self-loathing for the first half of my life. And so while I grew up in Queens in a really rich Italian community with wonderful parents who did all the things that corny Italians do, which is like raise their own sheep and cows and make their own wine and crazy stuff like that. Yeah. I was also in America trying to assimilate.
Yeah, so, I know that feeling. Oh boy, and I grew up in a small town and there were no Greeks.
You were in Appalachia.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just mention that Adriana Trigiani put us together. She's one of the great authors of our time. She wrote Big Stone Gap. She's from Appalachia.
Yep.
And
a different part of Appalachia, but yes.
Different part?
Yep.
Okay, it's a big, long place.
It's a big, long place.
And she connected us and made this happen, so I'm really grateful to her and of course to you, Chris. Because I know you normally do this from a big fancy school called Sacred Heart, right?
At the Sacred Heart University
Right,
Community Theater,
exactly,
which we talked about just originally. But let's get back to your family, because I want to know about mom and dad, okay?
Got it.
So mom, dad, who was the cook?
So in Italian households, everybody cooks. The men are usually in charge of the expensive fish, at least in my household, and then the moms are in charge of everything else. Plus the laundry, plus a full-time job, a part-time job.
Right. Maybe
everything.
If there's a garden, she takes the garden.
Absolutely. Oh, and is there a garden? Of course, there's a garden. There, Italians need to grow. I don't know what it is about them, but if there's 2 square feet of space, they need to grow something.
Yes.
Whether it's like 10 cherry tomatoes or one of these. Thank you for making me feel at home, by the way.
We have a little basil plant, right?
This is the garden.
So
my mom did a lot of cooking. My dad also did a lot of cooking, and so did my grandparents and my aunts and uncles. And basically, it was like a free-for-all in the kitchen every night.
Right.
Everybody was cooking. I was trying to cook. My sister was trying to cook. My brother was trying to cook. The really good cook was my mom. She's the one who really knew her stuff.
So how many siblings?
2 older siblings. I was the youngest.
Right.
But like 1,000, I haven't even met all my cousins yet.
Right.
There's like 150 in Germany I haven't met.
Right. You're the youngest.
Yeah, I'm the youngest.
Okay. So what was it like around the dinner table?
Pretty wild times. My dad was a carpenter. He worked, sort of late, so dinner time was like 9 o'clock. So we were all like crispy by 9 o'clock, pretty crispy and pretty ready to go to bed and, overtired. And, the food would come down and he'd expect to eat first. For some reason, we didn't understand
9 o'clock? Wow.
Yeah. This is like a 1920s guy from Italy.
Yeah.
He thought he was the king. And, he would eat first and he would cut us pieces of steak. I think he thought it was a nice way to be as a father. He would, there'd be a big T-bone and he'd cut out the fillet and cut it up into little pieces and put it on everyone's plate. He didn't know that we wanted to cut it ourselves and we didn't want his discards, and then there would be a pasta always and a salad and use something from the garden if it were summertime, like green leaf lettuce or some basil or some tomatoes, and then wine that my grandmother made and bread that my aunt made. And there was always some homemade stuff. And we, of course, didn't want to eat any of that.
Of course not.
We wanted the Wonder Bread, the American cheese. Right. We wanted the Kraft green container of Parmigiano Reggiano, of Parmesan.
Yes.
Parmesan, yeah. We used to be like, pew, pew, what is this fresh Parmigiano Reggiano?
You dial your size on the top, right? You sprinkle it the way you
that's
want.
right. You had 3 options.
Yep.
Very important. Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's sort of what the dinner table was like, but really it was much more luscious than I'm making it sound. There was so much love in the food and the preparation of food. We were, even though we grew up basically poor, we had wonderful food.
Right. What was the conversation like around the table?
So the conversation was... it's called a money order, Mom, not a mini order. It's Burger King, not King of Burger. It's McDonald's, not Mickledonald's. That was basically us roasting our parents.
Oh, really?
Because they couldn't pronounce anything properly. We got frustrated. And I was the only kid in first grade who didn't speak English, and I was the third of 3. We should be speaking English by the time I came around, right?
Right.
It was 1977 or something like that. Everybody knew what English was at that point. I understand the ones who came in the 20s, the 30s, we had those,
Yeah.
They took a long time to assimilate. They still lived next to the live chicken and rabbit store. It was that kind of refusal to become American.
Right.
So we basically roasted them every night for not being American enough. And funny thing is, later, of course, I realized that their refusal to become completely American was the treasure, that I'm still to this day picking from.
Hey, Rocco, I remember when I was growing up, when my parents would speak Greek in public, I would move away from them. I would walk into a different part of the room if we were at public, because I wanted to be American, right?
Exactly.
And we grew up in deeply ethnic households. Now, so conversation around the dinner table was in Italian?
So it was in Italian and broken English and proper English from as far as my sister was concerned, she spoke perfect English.
Yeah.
She was the older one. She's 11 years older than me, so she had a whole full life of education. By the time I got around, there was a lot of politics. There was a lot of talk about careers and work and, what one should do with their lives and what things are worthwhile pursuits. And my dad wanted me to be an attorney because he wanted to be an attorney and he couldn't.
Yep.
And
sounds familiar.
I always wanted to learn how to make cabinets, which is what he did. To this day, it's the coolest thing ever. You can make a piece of furniture with your hands. Imagine you had a husband who could do that. Come on, guys. You'd be pretty excited, right? Even if they could just fix the leaky faucet, you'd be pretty happy. Imagine a 10-foot sculpture out of maple that you would have in your house for 100 years.
Exactly. So he was a cabinet maker.
Exactly. Cabinet maker.
Not just a carpenter, but a cabinet maker. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So a lot of conversations were about the difference between a cabinet maker and a carpenter.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
You'd always tell the story about in Italy when they hired a cabinet maker, the way it worked, and this is 100% true, they would hire someone to live in their home and build furniture for them. And so they would say, in this space I need a dresser, 20 drawers, 6 feet high, and they would basically live in the home for a year and build that piece of furniture that was never going to move from that space. Right. And that's what he did for most of his life, and that's how he earned his living. So
he did that here?
No, he did that
in Italy. Okay,
Italy.
all right.
Yeah.
All right.
A little hard to do that here. So you need a piece of furniture? Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I'm moving in Monday. And can you imagine? My tools are these 3 bags. Can you imagine?
Now, were there
Call the police, honey.
Were there any rules at the table? That is, was there any discipline involved with?
I've been in therapy for 30 years trying to forget those rules. You're going to bring them all back.
What were they? Come on.
So he was really into dining etiquette.
Yep.
The continental style, the fork in the left hand, the knife in the right hand, and cutting with the fork, and pivoting with the fork, all this nonsense. I was like, wow, dude, that is really heavy. I'm only like 6. And my mom didn't do that, so it was always this push and pull of, eating like that. There was a lot of talk about wine. They made wine. They loved wine. They came from a great wine-producing part of Italy, of course.
What part of Italy?
Amalfi, Napoli, Amalfi, Campania. Where like basically all the best food and wine of Italy comes from. It's got mozzarella and eggplant and San Marzano tomatoes and Parmigiano. I mean, you got those 5 ingredients attributed to your region. You're in amazing shape.
You're golden, yeah.
Yeah. And so we talk a lot about the food, a lot about acculturation, this push and pull about how American we were and how American we should be. It was a constant conversation. They thought they were American enough. We thought they weren't, never going to be American enough.
And you said politics as well?
Yeah. A lot of politics. I remember lots of conversations about Nixon and the Republican and the Democrat, because that's how they spoke.
Right.
It was wild stuff.
And the meals
no
were
different than today.
Right. Exactly. And the meals were quite varied, but all Italian?
Always Italian. So it was like it was a coup for our family if my brother could somehow, because he used to convince my mom to do whatever he wanted her to do. He would go shopping with her and convince her to buy Wonder Bread, Weaver's frozen fried chicken in a box. Yeah, this is like a major win if we could get the Weaver's frozen fried chicken, and if he could get her to abandon her like unbelievably delicious, heartfelt menu of Italian specialties and make all these American processed foods.
Right.
Because we didn't have any of that in our lives, and we thought we were going without.
Right.
Really, we didn't realize we had the best food ever. So sometimes he would go shopping with her, and they'd come back with all that stuff, and he'd like give me the high sign and. Wow, Weaver tonight, that's amazing. We're going to eat frozen fried chicken, can you imagine?
Yippee! Now, one thing that I didn't realize, and it occurred to me, I remember it from the conversation with Lydia Bastianich, that originally, when many Italian immigrants came to this country, a number of the ingredients that they were used to having in the old country didn't make the trip. So a lot of the Italian food in Italian restaurants that I grew up with only had spaghetti, tomato sauce, the sort of the stuff that we all think of as being but it didn't really meet at all the kind of variety that came from the old country.
Yeah, so in the old country, everybody was growing everything, first of all. So if you had San Marzano tomatoes, and where my mom came from, they grew in your backyard. They were literally out there. Wild asparagus, porcini mushrooms, all of that stuff was out the door. And I remember not too long ago, I was shooting a show for Food Network called My Country, My Kitchen. We go to my uncle's house. His name is Amadeo, after Amadeus Mozart. He's a comedian, by the way, like should have been a comedian. He goes out, he's like, I'm gonna make you some pasta. He goes out to what looks like an outhouse. And apparently it's like the door to the outside part of the house. And this is the house my mom grew up in.
Yeah.
Comes back with wild asparagus in his hands. And he proceeds to make the most delicious wild asparagus pasta I've ever had in my life with 3 ingredients. I thought he was joking for the camera because we were shooting a show. I thought he was like putting on a show basically. And we all sat down to eat and we were like, what is happening? This is so delicious. And I remember seeing the pan. It was a huge aluminum pan with the handle broken off, like an inch of olive oil, 1 clove of garlic, 1 piece of pepperoncino, and then just these asparagus at the end, of course, Parmigiano Reggiano. Unbelievably delicious. They were wild from his garden. Yeah. Anyway, that's how everything worked back then. So, yeah, so we were foregoing that kind of love and affection,
right?
To eat the Weaver stuff, and then the Italian ingredients were completely compromised in America at that time.
Right.
You couldn't get any of that stuff.
Right.
But you can now. Now you can get it all,
yeah,
which is great. DOP. You want DOP. If you're buying anything Italian, it should say DOP on the
which
label.
means?
Denominazione Origine Proteggiata, or protected original,
right.
You know, yeah.
Right.
OG, basically. OG certified, yeah.
We have some friends who have a house in Umbria. Nice. And we went and picked olives last October. We're going back to do it again. What an experience.
So fun,
extraordinary experience.
Hopefully you didn't eat one right off the
show. No.
Yeah.
We know better, but we got the oil. Yes. We got the oil. They shipped us the oil. All right, so there you are. You're around the dinner table. You're talking, whatever. Did you guys ever go out to eat?
Restaurant was, you know, a bad word in our house. We never went out to eat in restaurants. My dad thought it was absolute disgraceful to you know, tell your mother you were going to eat in someone else's place. We would only go to other family members, and then there was like lengthy discussions about how much effort they put into the food and what ingredients they used. And like in Italy back in the day, you either ate the chicken or you ate the eggs. And if the guest was, you know, high enough esteem, you ate the chicken, which means you got rid of your egg-laying machine, right? So this is like what they talked about, right. And so we would go to other, you know, family members' house, and did they serve us the chicken or the eggs, you know? So it was a very important conversation. Going to restaurants was just crazy talk. We never went to restaurants. We did occasionally for big celebrations like graduations, and at the end of the meal, my dad would always negotiate. It's a pretty funny process. Did your dad negotiate, by the way, everywhere you went?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So my dad thought like Macy's was an appropriate place to negotiate, and you know,
he didn't go that far.
The bank, everywhere, you know. Interest, it says 2%. Can you give me 2.5%? You know, like that's not how interest works, Ralph. You know. So we never went to restaurants, and you know, part of the reason I was so fascinated with restaurants is we were never allowed to go to them, and when we did go, it was really magical. It was like, wow, what is this place? You know, they've got cool glassware and velvet chairs and music. And back then, for some reason, there was always a person dancing the hula. Do you remember this era?
The hula?
Yeah, the 70s, where there was like...
You grew up in a different place.
70s in New York and America, hula, you know, there was always Polynesian entertainment.
Wow.
Yeah, there were the tiki glasses and the Polynesian entertainment. And all of my pictures when I was a kid, my sisters graduated, my brother, there was always someone in a hula skirt. It's crazy stuff. Anyway, so you can imagine how fascinating I found it. So restaurants were for occasional use.
Right. Now, do you recall at any point when you went out to a restaurant when you went, that's what I want to do?
Every time I went out to a restaurant, I really loved the experience, and I loved the sense of hospitality. So back then, and I think definitely today to a great extent, not as much as I'd like, but the restaurant owners are very hospitable, understand hospitality, which is to make someone feel like they're in their own home. It doesn't happen everywhere. You know, I think it was really understood in the 70s, 80s, 90s that, you know, restaurants were about replacing the feeling that you get when you're home. Sometimes restaurants were better than home, much better than home. But so the hospitality they could show, but while not being Italian, was always impressive to me. Like, wow, these guys are not Italian, and yet they know how to, you know, make me feel like I'm at home.
Right.
So yeah, I was always impressed with what they did. And my dad owned a restaurant for a little while that I worked at. Yeah, when I was about 7, 8, 9, He owned an Italian restaurant in Point Lookout, New York, which is the original inspiration for Jaws, just so you know. Little fishing
Coastal
village.
town, yeah.
Yeah, little coastal fishing village, exactly, yeah. And the fishermen would bring him in mako shark and all kinds of stuff that you get off the waters of Long Island. And I remember I couldn't reach the stove. The oven, the pizza oven was too high for me, so I always had to stand on a milk crate, and I would always fall off and drop the pizza. So anyway, my brother, who was 3 years older, got to do the heavy lifting, and I was always so jealous of him, and he hated working there. The last thing he wanted to do was work in a restaurant.
Right, like me.
He's a numbers guy. He's one of those guys that still has the first dollar he made and saved. You know, like real numbers guy. He has 2 MBAs, you know, like one of those guys. Complete opposite. So, yeah, so restaurants were always fascinating, and I always gravitated towards them.
And your first job was?
A restaurant. Well, okay, first job where I got paid money, where there was an exchange of goods and services for money, was taking care of a homebound 98-year-old Henrietta Adams. Her name was, no kidding, no joke, Henrietta Adams.
How old were you?
I was, I think, 6 or 7 or 8 or something like that, and she was 98. This is in the 70s, so she was born in the 1860s.
Wow.
And she couldn't leave her home, and so I would shop for her 3-4 days a week, and she'd give me $5, and I'd buy her chicken crackers or M&Ms and whatever else she wanted, and she'd let me keep the change, and that was my pay. I think that was a job. It was a good job. It made her very happy.
I would say that was definitely a job.
Henrietta Adams was born in 1860 something.
I love it.
Can you imagine? And then I had a paper run, and then at 11 I worked in a pizzeria where I got paid 50 cents an hour. I worked 60 hours a week, and I was rich. I thought I was rich. I made $30 a week in 1978.
How did you fit in? Was this in the summer?
Summer, yes.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, child labor laws.
No, I broke every child labor law, for sure. Sal was the owner, and his kids used to come and play, and I worked for Italian Ice, basically.
Right.
I worked because Italian Ice was, like 95 cents a cup, and my mom would only buy 1 a week, so I was like, how do I make more Italian Ice happen in my life? She's like, Rocco, you can go get a job. Like, I'm 11, Mom. She's like, go get a job. You can pay for everything you want, It's like, wow. And then I was like, oh, I can do that? Like, you're serious? I can actually do that? Right. She's like, yeah, go get a job. She didn't think I was going to do it. The next day I had a job. Yeah. Next day I was working full time.
Did you absorb any of what did you absorb from that job?
I mean, the level of hospitality that Sal, barely spoke English, Italian immigrant, who I think was in America 3 years at that point, was 101% out of 100%. He was like your father, like your grandfather, welcoming you into his home. I mean, we just made pizza by the slice, fountain soda, Italian Ice. That was our menu, and he, the warmth that he could convey with his smile, with his look, with just everything about him was amazing. And I learned, hospitality being the most important part of what we do. I learned that from him for sure.
The comfort,
being generous with people, free slice here and there, free soda,
creating a community.
Yeah.
That sense of that you're welcome here. It's not necessarily your home, but you can come in anytime and feel comfortable.
I'll treat you like a human being, and I'll turn on the ovens again, even though we've been closed. And,
I used to catch a lot of flack. I had an uncle who worked with my father. My father was kind of the boss.
Is this guy? Okay, yeah.
This was the restaurant in West Virginia where
What was the name?
The Eat Well Cafe.
Oh, how American.
Come on.
The Eat Well Cafe.
Huh?
Yeah.
My uncle would give me a hard time because I like to talk to the customers, especially when I was in my sort of mid-teens. And there were a lot of, the courthouse was catty-cornered to the restaurant across the street, the county courthouse. There were doctors who came in. There were miners, coal miners who came in.
Right, of course.
And so I was exposed to the world, really, outside of West Virginia in many ways. And so it was fascinating to me. And my uncle, was like, ka-ching, ka-ching, come on, Another cup of coffee.
Turn and burn.
Yep, exactly.
Turn those tables,
so now,
buddy.
when you were a kid, and this is obviously we know about the working in the pizza parlor and the fact that you helped this old lady. Did you guys help in the kitchen when you were kids?
Yeah, so I wouldn't know if you'd call it helping, but we definitely were in the kitchen a lot, and kitchen was like,
were you involved?
You hear the stories of the kitchen being the center place of the home, and certainly in an Italian household, it's always the center place.
Right.
We were always in there, tugging at my mom, asking her for things, and she would let us cook occasionally if it wasn't the American ingredients that we were buying.
Right.
Pizza frita was like the first thing she'd let me cook. It was scraps of dough that were left over from bread making that you'd fry and coat in an inch of powdered sugar. So of course it was delicious.
Yes.
By the way, the Italian tricks are great. Many of them are just covered in sugar or cheese. Like whatever you're making, just an inch of sugar or an inch of cheese, and it's going to be great. And it does work.
So how did you end up in culinary school when you were 16?
Yes, so at 16, I was so interested in cooking. I was also wrestling in high school at the time. I was so interested in cooking that I gave up wrestling, which I loved, to continue working after school, because wrestling demanded that you work out before and after class, and on Saturdays, which means I basically couldn't work. And I remember it was like the same week or the same day, like out of a movie, my wrestling coach said, "Rocco, I got to sit you down and you have to pick between me and work." And at work, the chef said, "Rocco, you have to pick between us and wrestling." And so I was like, "Oh, well, I'm definitely going to keep working. There's money and independence and real love for the work." So I gave up wrestling and I started working full time. And at that time, I moved to a very serious local restaurant called the New Hyde Park Inn, and there was a guy named Jimmy there who was at the CIA. He was a student at the CIA, and he was the most professional dude I ever met.
This is the Culinary Institute of America.
American Hyde Park.
This is in Hyde Park,
not far from here. Originally founded in New Haven, Connecticut.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Thank you, Connecticut, for one of many gifts to the world. And he had a neckerchief. I'll never forget this neckerchief. He wore this like cravat, basically. And it's, old school cooks wore these things to keep sweat and whatever. It was some nonsense. It looked cool to me. And he always had a hat. He had these paper toques.
A toque.
That no one else wore that he loved, that he wore.
The regular toque with the little mushroom cloud on the top?
Oh, no, it was straight up. It was very erect. It was like straight in the air. And it was like the Marvel Universe to me. He was like a member of the Marvel Universe. And so I was like, how do I get into that school? He's like, well, they don't let anybody in. You'll never get, basically, threw the gauntlet down. I was like, okay, whatever I have to do to get in that school, I'm going to do. Which, of course, involved an internship and travel and this and that and the other and getting a million recommendation letters. And
travel?
For school, you had to do an internship and you could travel. I went back to New York City to work at the Marriott Marquis, which apparently we both worked at, maybe at the same time.
Yes.
I think I left there in 1988. When did you leave there?
91.
Okay.
I was in a Broadway show.
So the Marriott Marquis built this incredible theater. It was unbelievable theater. And one of my good friends now, I think, had the first show there that was an abysmal failure and wrecked him financially for life. And you had a great experience there, you said?
Yes, right. One of the great debacles in Broadway history, in fact. Yes.
So we both worked in the same building, and you know what that was like was Times Square was being completely gentrified and rejuvenated and bought up by Disney and turned into a very clean version of itself. So that's where I did my internship. But so getting in the CIA back then, you needed at least 2 recommendation letters and 1,600 hours of experience.
Now, are you still going to high school at the time? Or school?
No, so I was so interested in food, but no one does. Who does this? I went to summer school voluntarily.
What?
To accelerate through high school so I could get into the CIA earlier. Can you imagine going to summer school by choice, not by force?
No, no. Can't.
So even my parents thought I was crazy. I went to this crazy Catholic school for the first 2 years called Cathedral Preparatory Seminary. So at that school, you took so many classes, you basically only had to do 1 year of that school. It would be enough credits to graduate in a normal high school. So because I went to that school, when I got to the public school, long story short, we moved, I didn't need to do 4 years. I could do 3 years in a summer. And because CIA was going to let me in, I thought, let me accelerate and go to summer school and graduate early so I could go to the CIA.
Right.
So I went to summer school both sessions and took English and something else and graduated early, and that's why I was 16.
Okay. So then now you've been admitted?
Yes, finally the process? Yeah, I've been admitted. I got a new Toyota Corolla GT. I was feeling really good about myself.
From your earnings from the...
Yeah, from my earnings. You know, my mom always helped out, of course. She
Right.
was very generous. And then the Italian families do this weird thing. Tell me if you guys know about this. Whenever there's like a big moment in your life and you're going to go to college or something, first you find $50 in your pocket, $20 in another pocket.
Yeah.
You know, this money starts to appear.
Yeah.
They don't do that anymore, by the way, but they used to do it when I was
Yeah.
gold chains start to appear. I think they give you the gold chains knowing you're going to sell them someday. I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, I did down payments on a car when my kids graduated from college.
Okay,
Yeah.
there you go. You took all the gold chains and
Put them together, melted them
42nd
down.
Street.
Yes, right. So now,
funny.
when you were at CIA,
Yeah.
was it boarding?
Yes, yeah, you lived there. It's in Hyde Park, New York, so it's 110 miles from
Right.
New York City, and you lived in a dorm, and I lived in the dorm.
And did you guys
full time?
And were you cooking for yourselves as well as learning to cook?
On the campus, there are 3 restaurants. There's now 5, I think. Now there's a hotel actually, and we ran publicly, open to the public facilities.
Right.
We operated those in the latter part of our education there, and then the beginning, we basically went to class and we would wrap sandwiches in tin foil and practice flipping that in a pan. That's how we learned how to flip eggs and flip things in a pan.
Right.
The tin foil, of course, made sure nothing ever spilled.
Right.
So we did that in classrooms for 12 hours a day, every day. It was very much like working in a restaurant. They wanted you to feel the intensity. So they took what's supposed to be a 2-year educational program and they compressed it into 16 months plus a six-month externship. So it was 12 hours a day, 5-6 days a week.
Right.
Amazing school, though. If anybody's thinking about sending a kid there, it's a great school.
So then, when you finished,
Yeah.
is that when you went to Europe?
Yes.
How did
A
that
month
happen?
after graduation, I got on a plane. I looked up a ticket to Paris on cheapest flights. I think it was like a 1-800 number back then.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's called cheapestflights.com now. It flew through Pakistan. I had to fly through Karachi to get to Paris. I'm not kidding.
No.
I think it was $100. Yeah. It was so crazy. Oh my God. My mom, my poor mom, because I was 16 or 17 turning 18, maybe not even. Yeah, no, it was, that's right. 18 turning 19, sorry. You're young at 18. You're not ready to leave home.
Much less root yourself through Pakistan to get to Europe.
Karachi.
Right.
I didn't even know what Karachi was back then. And that's when there was smoking on the plane, in the old days. So it was, 1986. So it was a very interesting vibe on this plane, this huge plane, with, the 14-hour flight. So I did that. I remember bringing 3 suitcases of cooks' uniforms, cookbooks, 2 of which were Jacques Pepin's La Méthode, La Technique, and cooking utensils, knives. This is when they wouldn't arrest you for bringing sharp objects. I went to Paris and I went to work for a guy named Dominique Session at the Hotel Prince de Galles, Avenue Georges.
How did that happen?
Through magic dust and a friend who told me a lot of lies, named Robert Windhorst, who was a chef, who promised me this job in Paris. If I worked for him in this restaurant, he would get me a job in Europe, which was the Holy Grail. It's like, what's the acting equivalent? Working for Kazan or something? Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll take that one.
Something like that, right? When I got to Paris, I wasn't told for the entire year that we were making this arrangement that it wasn't real. It was all made up. So when I got to Paris and to the hotel, chef's like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "I'm here for work, chef." And he's like, "Yeah, okay." I spoke to Robert. I told him, maybe we could do something at some point in the future, but I have nothing for you. And I'm like sitting on 5 pieces of luggage, tears streaming down my eyes. So the guy felt so bad because I was such a mess. Took me to his house that night, made a little room for me.
Wow.
And took me under his wing, and before I knew it, I was attending foie gras classes with Joe Robuchon, who's arguably one of the greatest chefs that ever lived, and lived in Paris for 2 years and had an incredible life-changing culinary experience. Yeah, and the girls weren't so bad either.
So then you finished the, if you want to call it an apprenticeship, would you?
Yeah, there was definitely an apprenticeship. I worked for nothing or next to nothing most of the time I was there.
Right.
I worked actually at Cactus Charlie's, which was an American Western-style burger joint with 100 burgers to make money. And that was 6,000 francs a month, which was minimum wage in Paris. And then I worked for free at the Hotel Prince de Galles with Dominique. And that was my life for, 18, 24 months, basically. Wow. Yeah. Wow. It was awesome, by the way. Yeah.
I would think so.
There were times where I had to sleep in the storeroom of one of the restaurants because I didn't have a room or anywhere to go. And I would make a bed out of the side towels. Mm-hmm. And I'd wake up and wash my hair with eggs. Because they were readily available and they're good for your hair.
Yeah, they're very good. I used to use mayonnaise.
Wild stuff, wild stuff.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. So then you finish the apprenticeship and then it's, I'm going back home?
By the way, we're only up to like 1982 now, just so you know.
We only have a few more minutes, so we have to telescope it a little bit now. So you're back in the States?
Back in the States.
Where did the first restaurant come from?
Back in '86, opened the first restaurant. About 10 years later, reasonable amount of time working for other people.
And you're working for other people.
Yeah, working for other people. Oh, and I went back to college. I went to live in Boston.
You went to
Boston University to get a degree in business,
yeah.
Which I did for like two and a half years there. I was a teaching assistant there. That's how I met Jacques Pepin, who was also a professor, associate professor there. I just visited him on the way here tonight, and lovely seeing him. And he didn't know that it was like a financial aid package. You could work for Jacques Pepin, or you could work for, in a library.
Right.
So I was like, I'll take Jacques Pepin. Yeah. The choices were assist Julia Child or Jacques Pepin at the cooking classes that they did, or basically like clean trays in the cafeteria. So I was very happy to take the Julia and Jacques apprenticeship.
I would think so. Yeah.
And then about 10 years later, working in great restaurants in New York and Boston. I found some investors and opened up a restaurant. Not unreasonable amount of time.
No, actually, for some reason, in the reading that I did about you, I had a sense of the kind of telescope time, but it took a while, but it happened.
It took the appropriate amount of time. Yeah, I think so. I think now the time would be a little faster. The schedule for most people is much faster.
I think the schedule for most people is faster in everything. I know it is in my business. You talk to young actors and they're upset if they haven't become celebrities by the time they're 23.
Right. Yeah.
And just their lives are gone. They're destroyed.
Whereas you didn't start acting until college, probably, right?
I started acting in college.
Normal upbringing, and then you went to college.
And then I went to graduate school, then I went on tour, and then I went in repertory companies, and it took time. Yeah, absolutely. But you get finely cooked, finely baked.
Yeah, that old-fashioned notion of like learning the skill.
Yeah, exactly. Right. God. So when did the first cookbook happen?
I was here for that cookbook, by the way. I was here in Madison. I was 2 hours late, 2002, called Flavor. So the biggest difference back then is I didn't realize that absolutely nobody is going to cook like a chef at home. That's just a fantasy we have, and it's never comes to fruition. So this book is very different, very much from a home point of view and a home cook's point of view, because it did come from my home kitchen. From the pandemic,
right,
till a couple of years ago when we put the book to bed.
Right, and I was very interested in reading about the genesis of the book because it came out of the pandemic, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was coming out of the review that you were talking about at the Standard Hotel to, pandemic, everything is shut down. My book came out March 2020. I was on book tour. Everything was canceled, book tour canceled. Everybody go home. Okay, so I go home, and I'm all of a sudden cooking at home for, friends, family, and then a very tight-knit circle of people for those who lived in New York City. It was pretty isolating, hard to get ingredients. So like all the challenges that a home cook faces, I was deeply immersed in. Like, what do you do with a can of beans, a can of soup and some rice?
That you can get delivered.
And you have to do it twice a day, every day, So this book comes from that experience of cooking at home as a home cook for really the first time in my life. And, just understanding things are very different for the home. Home cook needs things to be fast, easy, and absolutely delicious, really delicious.
And one of the things really interesting to me about what's in the book is that you start the book with a page, a full spread of condiments.
Yeah.
Because those are the things that you need to create anything.
Yes. If you can get those 20 condiments in your cupboard, you're going to have everything you need for every recipe in the book. And another 100,000 creations that if you explored, you'd be able to come up with. They're, the best of Asian condiments, the best of Italian condiments, some Greek condiments, some of my favorite cheeses. One of my new favorite discoveries is bouillon powder. Who knows about bouillon powder? Chicken bouillon powder. You do? Such a cheater, by the way. You're a cheater. I have learned to cheat now, and it's so much easier. Yeah. You throw a little bouillon powder in anything, and it's like, whoa, where'd all that flavor come from? So my mom always had these little Maggi cubes. I never really knew what they were. Yeah, yeah. And now I understand what she was doing the whole time. So that's in the condiments. And then there's like, sambal olek, which is basically ground up garlic and chili. Every Thai Asian kitchen will have that. There's oyster sauce, fish sauce, soy sauce, sugar-free ketchup. I still think about healthy cooking, even though this is not a healthy book per se. And
that's one of the things I wanted about health.
Right. I wanted to shed that too because I realized at home, when you're cooking at home every day, it's very difficult to weave in the healthy narratives.
Right.
I already done 9 health and wellness books.
But also, you talk about, in the introduction of the book, you talk about the fact that it gave you a new appreciation for the fact that you were, at the time, toiling away at creating food for your family, but you weren't really immersed in the family experience.
Oh, you mean how I continued to pretend to be a pro chef at home?
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a little bit of that happening. Sometimes you get, you have this, you float above your body and see what you're doing and realize it's messed up, and so I try to continue to cook like a pro chef. Literally just come off a very intense gig at the Standard Hotel. We got reviewed by everybody. Our goal was to recreate the menu, make it the greatest restaurant in New York City. And then thrown into this, pandemic where you're at home every day with no help, no dishwashers, no prep cooks. And so for a little while I wasn't able to make the pivot, the turn.
Yeah. But what it did was it created the form for this new book.
For sure, yeah. I mean, this book was supposed to be keto too. This was supposed to be the continuation of the keto comfort diet, and the experience at home with family was so transforming that I had to call my editor and say, we got to do something. We can't do that. Right. We have to do something totally different because I understand this is what people really need. And it was, humbling and interesting and fun. And
I have to admit that it's part of my process that when the book, I received the book from the publisher, my wife and I cooked something from the book.
Oh, cool!
Night before last. Great. Yeah, we cooked the sea bass, buttermilk.
Oregano buttermilk deep fry?
Yeah. And it was amazing. And my wife has got her eye on the steak Diane, by the way. She's ready for that one.
Another good dish. So the buttermilk coated sea bass is a little bit of a Latin flavor, and then Diane is like 19th century American.
So wonderful. And what's so great about the book is that every time I turned the page, I went, I got to try this. And it's not going to be that difficult.
Thank you.
Not going to be that difficult. Now,
that was the idea. Pick dishes that would be on everyone's top 10 list. And just make 100 of those.
You did it. Yeah. All right. So now we're going to take some questions from the audience.
Yes. Great.
Yeah.
Cool.
What's your next big project?
So it's so funny whenever you put out a book, someone says, "What's your next big project?" This is the next.
This is the project.
This is 4.5 years of work. Believe it or not. I know it looks like nothing. It looks like a doorstop, but this book started in 2017 or 18, and was delivered 18 months ago, and we moved the pub date 5 times. So this is definitely the hard part is selling the book. The easy part is writing the book, even though it takes 4 years. So now getting out there and marketing the book is definitely the hard part. Definitely the next big project. But I do have a pop-up in the works for this summer that I'll announce on IG. That'll be in Southampton if all goes well. So you'll be able to experience some of this if you're willing to drive out there for 8 hours. So last year my pop-up was in Sag Harbor, which is really close to where the ferry lands on that side. But this year it'll be in South. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
How did it feel to get the James Beard Award?
It was pretty good. It was a pretty good feeling, I have to tell you. Yeah. So, funny story. I wasn't there to accept it. which is crazy, right? You would think you'd make sure you would be there for that. So my publisher and the person who worked for me at the time were like fighting to accept it. And anyway, even though I wasn't there to accept it, which was a big ceremony, big black tie gala, it felt amazing. It felt really, really good. And I still have the framed medal hanging at home proudly. It's pretty cool. You think it's a cool award, I guess, huh? Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. James Beard is someone I actually knew. And, he stood for a lot of the things that I still think are valuable and appreciate very much.
What's your favorite food?
My favorite food?
Yes.
So many. I have so many favorite foods. Yeah. So without question, pasta, pizza, the same things that you probably like. Pasta, pizza, Asian food, Chinese food, Thai food. If I had to pin it down to a dish, chicken parm, OG carbonara, the best, tuna sushi you could find, soup. Soup is good. You can get a good pho, like a Vietnamese style beef soup, which I have in the book. So that's a great one. But as you can see, most foods are my favorite foods. Yeah.
Do you have a young chef, up-and-coming chef that you admire?
Yes, I do. A few, actually. Farial Abdullah from Have and Mar is amazing. She works for Marcus Samuelsson at Have and Mar. It's a place called Have and Mar. And
Is this
she's
the Harlem
terrific.
restaurant?
Sorry?
Is this a Harlem restaurant?
No, it's the one in Chelsea.
Oh.
Yeah, the one in Chelsea. She's great. She's someone I think about a lot when people ask about up and coming. Yeah. Check her restaurant out. It's great. Yeah. She's a big, bright force in our world. Yes?
My whole family loves this whole new television, Tournament of Champions we love, Top Chef, all
cool.
of that.
Thanks,
so how do you
thanks.
love it? But number one, how long does it take to film one episode of Tournament of Champions?
Tournament is however many weeks it's on is how many weeks we shoot it. 5 weeks, I think. 5 weeks of shooting, but they shoot more than one episode a week. So I know it looks like there's one episode a week, but we shoot like a half an episode a day, but we can only shoot 3 days. It's like one of those crazy schedules. So 5 weeks total. And I spend most of my time in the trailer, waiting to be called, so I can barely tell what's happening. They sequester us. We don't know who's cooking. We don't know who we're judging for real. We find out when the show is on air. There's this crazy blind judging we have to do for tournament.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so sometimes it's your best friend and you don't know because they don't even tell you who's competing, so.
Do you think that that's changing the scope of restaurants, of food, that this whole new generation is so into food in such a public way?
Interesting you should ask, because I've talked about that a lot with family and friends and chefs in the business, that the competition shows are now populated with people who were raised on competition shows. The first group of competition chefs were chefs in the wild, right? And now all these kids are kids who were, when they were young, they were already watching Top Chef. So it has changed things. I think it's democratized menus quite a bit. It's given opportunity to a lot of people who wouldn't normally have opportunity, and it's made things comfortably more casual, and casual in a way that I think is very good for our business. So instead of going to in my day, we wanted to go to Le Cirque, because that was the best restaurant in the world. Now we're going to want to go to the ones we saw on TV, for sure. Yeah. I want to go to Shoda's restaurant. Do you know Shoda? Yeah. I feel like his place is going to be great. Yeah.
Question back there?
Yeah, I was wondering what it's like to cook on Guy's Ranch Kitchen. I love that show.
It's wild. So for everything for Guy is a game, right? This is how he lives his life. It's not just for the show. Everything's a competition. Everything's a game. He's like one of those characters from, who can remember The Odd Couple? Anybody? There was a character on The Odd Couple who would bet on everything. Anyway, he's like that. So it's full of surprises. There's always something happening that's unpredictable. I was just competing on Guy's Grocery Games. I know it's different than Guy's Ranch Kitchen, but it's a very similar kind of feeling. It was me, Malarkey, and Granachelli, and he was upset that the games that he picked weren't challenging enough. Like, we seemed to have an easy time, which is not true. We were still struggling. So he changed the rules 5 times in the 30 minutes we had to cook. So you know how it goes, right? He picks a game and you go, and you play the same game for 30 minutes. But for us, he's like, okay, now it's cart swap, now it's station swap, now it's frozen aisle, now it's, so that's what it's like. It's like, what's gonna happen in the next 3 minutes? But it's also lots of laughs, lots of tequila. He really carries around that bottle of tequila. He loves that stuff. It's good stuff, by the way, it's good stuff. He has his own tequila, of course, that he makes.
No, really?
Yeah.
One more question?
Mr. Chicken Bouillon. Come on.
What's your take on
Cheater.
molecular gastronomy?
It's fine. There are a lot of great techniques came from it. One of the greatest chefs, Ferran Adria, to ever have lived, certainly, made good use of it. Using those techniques for the sake of it seems, silly to me sometimes, but, certainly learning how to spherify liquids and turn them into solids is pretty cool and adaptive and helps you make dishes taste better, look better. Gels, fluid gels, all of those are like part of the kitchen now. So I think some of it's been really good and really helpful. Certainly cooking sous vide in a circulator is an amazing adaptation, has changed everything in cooking. So much of it is very, very useful and interesting. I just feel bad for the chefs who just learned about it and feel compelled to include 3 molecular techniques that don't have any context. So I actually ate at Ferran Adria's restaurant in Spain in 1995, and boy, I mean, it's life-changing, and it was all molecular, So in his hands, it's amazing and adaptive and game-changing.
I always finish the podcast with one final question. If there is a moment in your life now or in the recent past where a smell or a taste takes you back to that time in the kitchen in Queens, what's that?
To the kitchen in Queens, wow, okay.
Or your childhood.
Yeah.
Your childhood,
okay.
Even if it's not the kitchen in Queens.
Okay, so it's during the pandemic, I collaborated with a woman named Jenny Martinez who became famous for her birria tacos. I don't know if you guys saw that on TikTok, birria tacos everywhere, right? She has a cookbook out now, actually, called Listo. And I did, we did a Mexican and Italian mashup of pizza and lasagna. And she used the bouillon powder. And the bouillon powder reminded me of the spice mix my mom would use on those T-bone steaks for my family and I. And I didn't know back then, but basically it was like garlic powder, onion powder, and bouillon powder.
Which is in the recipe that we cooked the other night. The garlic powder and the onion powder.
Right, and so it's like, it's instant umami is what you get from that. And so about 2.5 years ago when we made the Italian-Mexican birria taco pizza, and I got a little hint of that flavor on the pizza, and I was very happy that it took me back and made me remember those wonderful moments at the kitchen table in Queens.
Yeah. Well, we all have those moments.
Misty-eyed now.
Well, that's what the podcast is about, those misty moments. And all I can say is, Rocco, DiSpirito, thank you so much for being a guest on Cooking by Heart. This has been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Great to see you all. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. You've been wonderful.
My pleasure, man.
So great.
Thank you.
Thank you.